when we're having this discussion at the back of our minds, we should also ask this question: are we really free to express ourselves in Malawi? And also, are we able to access information as citizens of the country? So these are the questions that we have to reflect on. And also, maybe before I start with the deep questions, I would want to pose to Ms. Teresa Ndanga. So you kind of introduce yourself, but also the head of your institution, because we want to know what MISA is doing. Thank you. Over to you, Teresa.
I hope you can hear me. Yes. So yeah, my name is and I'm chairperson of the Southern Africa in Malawi. MISA is a regional body, and therefore it's in other Southern African countries as well. Our mandate is basically to fight for media independence, but also some of the law rights that are connected to it. So more like freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and access to information. This is where our mandate lies. So you will see that most times here in the country, we are advocating for rights in various platforms and engaging the authorities. So in brief, I think that's what I would say about our organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll come to Councillor Mafriwa, if you can just have a minute to explain. Thank you.
So my name is Wesley Mafriwa. I am a human lawyer and I am practicing under the flagship of Kawero Lawyers.
Yeah. That's fine.
Affairs Committee of Parliament. I hope you're all aware that as Parliament, we are there to make laws, to represent the people, and of course, to provide oversight over the executive. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chisi, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Peter Chisi. I serve as Director for Civil and Political Rights at the Malawi Human Rights Commission. The Commission is there as a constitutional body to protect human rights, and the issues of access to information are within that mandate. In addition to that, the Civil and Political Rights Directorate within the Commission is the one that hosts the Access to Information unit. And this unit is the one that coordinates all activities for the promotion of the right of access to information. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My name is Bui Adegoke, and I'm with Paradigm. If I work there as Senior Programs Manager, I lead the organization's programs across the continent, and I'm honored to be on the panel with all of you, Member of Parliament, and the Director of the Human Rights Commission. I hope this will
and 2018. I can just highlight, we targeted heads of MTAs, public relations officers, all district commissioners, media institutions, civil society, as well as the traditional leaders. I should add that because of that uncertainty that was there in terms of operationalization of the Act, around 2019 or thereabouts, there was some fatigue from our side. We were feeling frustrated that our efforts were not getting anywhere because government kept on changing in terms of conditions for operationalization of the Act. Therefore, we really appreciated the bold step that was taken around August 2020, when the Minister of Information declared and announced in the Gazette that the law would become operational on 30th September 2020. He even actually announced that the regulations were going to be gazetted in October. But because there was an outcry for further inputs into the regulations, that process was delayed. And in October 2020, the Commission organized a national stakeholders conference to validate the regulations and seek inputs from stakeholders. After that, the regulations were finalized and they were published in January 2021. So in effect, from January, the law is now fully operational. That being the case, there are still some gaps here and there. And right now, the Commission has started the process of actually monitoring compliance levels to assess institutions. How are they putting in place mechanisms and measures for ensuring that access to information is making sense? So we are happy that maybe a number of public institutions now have information officers, and I think the number is around 120, but that list has not yet been published, so people don't know. And the law and the regulations require that the Minister of Information must publish that list so that people are able to know how to access institutions. At the moment, we're working hand in hand with the ministry to ensure that they can actually publish that list as required by law and regulations. In addition to that, because we have the responsibility of raising awareness, we have always planned that once this list is available, as a Human Rights Commission, we should conduct a detailed training on access to information for all information officers. Mark this, I have said we have been doing orientations, but because of the centrality of the responsibility of information officers in their institutions, for these ones, we want them to undergo a detailed training because we believe that it is them that will also ensure that within their institutions, they can even train their colleagues, management, and everyone else, and actually even advocate for the mainstreaming of access to information within their institutions. At the moment, I can just highlight to you that when you go around, most institutions don't even have any resources for ATI, meaning that the law is there, but they are doing nothing to implement ATI. It is our position that every institution must actually ensure that they streamline ATI activity. They must have a budget. They must have all the relevant resources that are required. Maybe for now, I think let me stop there. But before I conclude, let me simply say, as a Human Rights Commission, we developed guidelines for access to information. We assisted with the development of the regulations on access to information, and we have also provided orientation number of institutions, apart from the ones that I mentioned, the National Local Government Finance Committee, even the media through MISA Malawi, the police, Malawi Prison Service, and MDF. So we are available as an institution, and any institution that wants to be trained or oriented on ATI should feel free to contact us, and they will be there to provide advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you that already you have touched on the gaps, but also just a follow-up question in terms of the information officers. We are talking of 120, and I'm only thinking to say, wouldn't that have an impact on citizen accessing information? Because if we do not have the information officers in public institutions, definitely that's one limitation. What would you say about that?
That's correct. One, I think the law recognizes almost all public institutions to actually comply with access to information. From that, even the civil society organizations are also supposed to comply with access to information. The figure of about 120, I'm only mentioning about public institutions, but even in the public institutions, what we have noticed so far is that there are some big government departments which operate at national, regional, and district level. Some of them, at the moment, they have only identified or designated information officers at the national level. We think that is not enough. What we are thinking is that if you have that big department, they should have mechanisms to have information officers even at regional level. Think of it, someone in Chikwawa or in Sanje looking for information for the Malawi Revenue Authority. Should they contact all the way to Lilongwe? They should be able actually to contact an information officer within Blantyre. Think of Malawi Police Service, Area 30, they are here. I know they have designated information officers. They also decentralizing because someone in Mzuzu, someone in Luchenza looking for information should not actually drive all the way or actually call Lilongwe to get information. But these are, there are provisions
doing the research, and it's been published. This to freedom of expression, access to information. But because of time, I'll just summarize some of the legal barriers itself is a bit of a barrier. My view of that act is that in such a way that I mean, it's a good thing. It's maybe 98% good, but there are some elements there that actually in themselves they do delimit the right to access to information. So, for example, if you read that act, it was modeled after an African model law. So there is an African model law that was created by the Commission, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Deliberately, some things there's some things which we took, and in my view, are actually very important for the actualization of that right. For example, on for example, issues of proactive disclosure. Notice the model, one of the things that we're supposed to be proactively disclosed is an issue. For example, I've always said this. I think I had this discussion with my colleague here from the Human Rights Commission, or there's another person from Human Rights Commission, that maybe the generality of the way maybe section 15, I think, is drafted. It actually also includes, for example, AIP, access to, what do we call it? Subsidy, farm input. But it's one of the biggest expense in our budget. In my view, unless maybe I've just missed it, but I've never seen it being proactively published in the newspapers to say, this year, this is what I think the lady there, the report actually, I think, if I saw her properly. So if you read that act, the way it's drafted now, it's not mandatory on the state actors who publish to us who gave us the inputs. Why did we buy from X and not Y? But under the model law, such information was supposed to be proactively published without seeking for it. The other gaps that in the act are also to do with enforcement and the complaints handling mechanisms. So if you read, for example, the model law, it clearly spells out in terms of, okay, if information has not been held, what do you do, and so on and so forth. The other small problems that we have, and I'm doing a case, and we've just faced a big hitch, is that there has been not much synchronization of that act with other laws on access to information. So I'll give you an example of Section 36 of the new Political Parties Act of 2018. So Section 36 of the Political Parties Act says that you can go to the registrar and ask the registrar to give you information that he's keeping. So one of my clients actually did that. So and remember, under Section 27 and 28 of the Political Parties Act, one of the information that they're supposed to keep is that now all political parties are supposed to have 2 separate bank accounts for their donations. Donations from public sector are supposed to be in one account, separate account, from donations that are coming from private sector. And this information is supposed to be kept at the registry. Okay? And under Section 36 of the Political Parties Act, you and I have rights to go there and say, I want to know in the bank account of MCP, who has been giving them private donations, who has been giving them public donations. So one of my clients did that, wrote the registrar, because remember, and by the way, maybe honorable here, since he's here, deliberately or not deliberately, accidentally maybe, they haven't appointed yet the registrar of political parties. For such a crucial role, and as we are going towards the elections, there isn't the registrar of political parties yet. The Act Section 4 says that, but the gist of what I'm saying is that there isn't synchronization. So in terms of then what happens if you fail? If you read the Act, it says if information is withheld from Section 27 within 17 days, it's presumed that that information has been denied. So Section 27 of that Act, or the access to information, if you send a letter to ESCOM and say, I need such information, and within 15 days they don't give you, the presumption of law, unless they have to rebut it, is that that information has been denied from you. And you can start the internal mechanisms. So the question is, the internal mechanisms under the Access to Information Act, does it follow? In this case, of all these statutes, and then also enforcement. And I think I like what our brother from the Malawi Human Rights Commission said, to say, I think compliance with the Act also has been a very big problem. But having said that, there are also legal provisions, other statutes outside of this, apart from perfecting the law, which is a very good law, apart from perfecting it, because of time, I'll just rush through, but there are some statutes and the legal practices out there which have impeded in a way the right to access to information, some of which, for example, we've got the Official Secrecy Act, which in my view, was meant to, to deter, espionage. If you read, my view is that the philosophical foundation of that law is to avoid espionage. But with time, because there are no proper guidance in terms of how, what official secrets should be kept and so on and so forth, effectively, if not properly used, it's a law which delimits the use of, access to information and that right. And there are a few other laws as well. And if you read the report, it clearly outlines all the laws that we found out to be problematic, and including not just laws, but even practices. One such practice, a controversial one, is you know, the practice of swearing to, what do they call, oath of secrecy. So what we have been saying is that we're not saying oath of secrecy is a bad idea, because obviously there will always be some official secrets which you can divulge out there. But maybe moving forward, we can, to synchronize that again with maybe swearing in, maybe somewhere when you are signing, you say, I will only keep such secrets except as allowed under the Access to Information Act, or and so on. So from that, I think the other question was to freedom of expression. In terms of freedom of expression, I think that's where we've got most of our problems. If you read our constitution, as Mandida already said, sections 34 and 35, they guarantee the right for you to have an opinion, and also the right to freely express that opinion in the subsequent section. If you read the constitution, that's all it says. It doesn't then elaborate to say what, how, and so the parameters of the right itself are not very clear in the constitution. It simply says you've got the freedom to freely express yourself. But then, as you may be aware, when we interpret use international very signatory is called one word and the ICCPR, under the ICCPR. One very simple thing, and all these international instruments, is that laws that are called in Latin lèse majesty, they cannot meet the international standard. So lèse majesty is a law that says you cannot insert the majestic people. So these are the president, the ambassadors, and so on and so forth. You'll be shocked that our penal code, you can't insert not just the president, you also can't insert an ambassador, you can't insert a diplomat under the principle of relation. Now, another problematic area has been the Electronic Transaction and the Cybersecurity Act, which is in very broad and general terms. So, which is worded in very broad and general terms. It's got criminal provisions that are worded in general broad terms. So, for example, a provision that simply says you can't spam or you can't receive items. And you and I may never agree on what is offensive. I may find maybe someone using the N-word, the N-word is not offensive. And maybe also the N-word is offensive depending on who says it and to who. And so on and so forth. Maybe someone from some parts of the country where they easily use abusive words. So the broadness and the vagueness of some of these legal provisions have resulted, and as I think Charles was mentioning, to the arrest of people. Now, why is this a problem? I think there was this debate, I think an hour or so ago. It's always a problem if you criminalize speech. The best remedy for if someone is offended for under freedom of expression, when someone has freely expressed themselves, is to take a civil action. Go to court, seek damages. It's been held, and I think there are two judgments from our colleagues from Zimbabwe. There's two judgments actually that have held that criminal defamation, for example, is unconstitutional. But in Malawi, again, criminal defamation is, in fact, there's a case that we are handling, I think, with the partners, Teresa here, and Youth and Society, where we are actually challenging the constitutionality of our criminal defamation, the Chisambere case. We're just waiting for judgment now. Justice, but we are challenging the constitutionality of that provision. Apart from this, there are several other provisions, for example, under the Protected Emblem and Flags Act, Protected Names, Emblem, and Flags Act, that says you can't insert the Malawian flag, you can't insert and so on and so forth. And you can go to jail for that. I could go on, but basically the provision, are so many of them. It's a report which is, I think, over 30-something pages. We have cited so many laws and provisions and practices, judicial practices inclusive. I want to finish by saying, again, I'll repeat what Charles said. If you ever, by any chance, and it would be very unfortunate if you do this to me, but if by any chance you put a microphone in my bedroom, maybe under my pillow, you hear how here I'm looking like a quiet, innocent person, but the kind of things I discuss with my wife, you'll be shocked. There will be unbiblical, and because you see, she's my wife. I discuss very vulgar things, because she's my wife. I have to be very open with her, discuss everything that I can say here. Why? It's my private space. It's within that private space that you've come into. You've put a microphone in my private space. That's what freedom of expression should do. Now, if I am discussing some things with a person on a platform that says it's end-to-end encrypted, what it means is that I got into the platform thinking that no one is listening. Think of it as a microphone under the pillow where people can say really vulgar things. Now, if the state operations, they want to be listened, what they'll simply see is vulgarity. That's what will happen. Is the right thing to do then arresting people for posting vulgarity and this? In my view, once you get into that private space, what you see is vulgarity, abuse, and that's what it's all about. The remedy for that is, one, don't even go into that space in the first place. Two, don't criminalize. If anything, maybe if it's severely wrong, sue them. And just to comment on one thing which my brother, I think Daud said, the DG, that no, there is no severance. Maybe using the word severance, spying, and so on and so forth is too strong. But what is severance? Severance for me is if you hear my daughter saying, "Oh, and you take on that, you are angry with me and you want to arrest me," that's severance. In the first place, ignore it. It's my daughter, it's my little 2-year-old son talking nonsense. Forget about it. So severance is not used in the sense of spying machines and so on and so forth. But the fact that the state can take a screenshot of what is being said in private conversations at WhatsApp, close WhatsApp group, that's severance. Because it means they are interested to know what we are discussing in private WhatsApp, whether using a machine, whether using a member of the WhatsApp group, that's severance. And that's very wrong, in fact. So I would say that in closing.
Thank you so much. I know it's not easy to summarize the whole report, but kindly just also explain to us in terms of the recommendations. I know in the report there's a section on recommendations. So would we just explain more on the recommendations? A minute.
Okay. So now that I've been given a minute, maybe let me just quickly run through. So there's some of the laws that I think I didn't mention, but I'll quickly, in less than a minute, maybe try to summarize them. We've got, for example, the Mines and the Minerals Act under Section 38. You can't get information regarding licenses. So once someone has got a mining license, that's a closed chapter. You can't ask the Minister of Mines and say, okay, what information does this person submit and so on and so forth. So that's obviously infringing access to information. The oath and secrecy I've already mentioned about that. And in terms of the freedom of expression, there's the Printed Publications Act 1901. It's got provisions there, for example, section 3, 2, 4, 5, that delimits what you can publish and what you cannot publish. The Electronic Transaction and Cybersecurity Act, which I already mentioned, it's got a few problematic areas. And then we've got the Censorship and Control of Entertainment Act. And by the way, on censorship, there's a judgment in from South Africa, I think it's Prince and others versus the state. The court there held that it is infringing on your privacy and your human rights to criminalize watching pornography. You just heard that. So I've forgotten the parties, but there's that. And it says it, so from a religious point, you can say it's wrong. From a moral point, it's wrong, but that's what the courts have said. And in terms of the content, and then there's a Preservation of Public Security Act. There are some things that you can say. You can say, for example, under section 3, subsection 2, there's a penal code, several. Under the penal code, that's the most problematic one. And then we've got the Protected Flag, Emblems and Names Act, as already mentioned. Now, in terms of the recommendations, my first in fact, there are more arrests now under this government based on freedom of expression than all the other previous governments, maybe minus the Kamuzu Banda, maybe. Those are the statistics, by the way. I'm not speaking from my head. Those are the statistics. So for me, I would say, let's start with a moratorium and say, okay, we are not going to arrest people based on these draconian laws. Old and archaic and draconian laws. Because I was discussing, one of the professors said archaic laws. No. Some of them are not archaic. For example, the Electronic Transaction and what Act is not archaic. It's not an old law. It's just, I don't know, less than 5 years old. It's not archaic. It's a new law, but it's draconian in a way. So, and say we start with the moratorium. They're not going to be used for now. We have done it, by the way, for, as you know, there was a moratorium on the provision under the penal code on having carnal knowledge against the order of nature. There was a moratorium at some point, nobody was arrested under that law. So then we have reviews and repeals. So the laws can be reviewed and repealed. But if all this thing fail, the other recommendation is that maybe it's up to us now to challenge some of these legal provisions in court. And as I was speaking, I know Teresa, Charles, and Michael, if he was here, they have a consortium. They engaged me and another colleague. We are challenging some of the provisions under the Cybersecurity Act, as well as the provision on criminal defense. Many recommendations, but apart from that, lastly, our voice, we continue engaging our honorables here and telling them that this is bad, and maybe our voice will not be landing on deaf ears.
Thank you so much. This time around, would I invite Teresa Ndanga. I know MISA has been one of the institutions that have been calling for the Access to Information Act. And I just want to hear from your perspective to say, where are we now? Have we registered any milestones? And if you can also touch on the gaps in the recommendation, perhaps because of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be brief. I think, first of all, we are really excited that we are where we are now, where we have an operational law that people can utilize, not just journalists, but citizens can actually demand for information. And I'm using the word demand because it's an obligation now for public offices to be able to provide information. In terms of the milestones since January, some of them have already been highlighted, so I don't want to get into the details of that. But the first thing I think is just the fact that now we would be able to access certain information that we were not able to in the past, especially for journalists who are, for instance, in the investigative journalism section. Sometimes there is information that people don't want to bring out in the light. So you will use any traditional means for you to get that information as a journalist, but you won't get it. With the access to information law, you have an alternative. And there are actually procedures that you can follow in case someone blocks your way, doesn't provide you that information. And if the law says that doesn't put that information under the section where it's kind of accepted not to give it out, then you can take it up with the Malawi Human Rights Commission, the head of that institution, or even take it. So the remedies that you can use in case you are denied information. I'm happy at least to say there are some citizens who have started using the law. And we as MISA have also received some expressions of interest from some citizens who do not understand how they would go about demanding for this information and are seeking for help in terms of getting this information from various authorities. And what excites me is really the fact that some of these calls are coming from people in the grassroots, in the villages, asking for help in terms of going about demanding for information. And that is very good. Another milestone that I would want to also mention is the fact that since we started making noise about access to information being operational, we've actually seen that civil society organizations, networks in districts and so forth, are actually holding their local councils to account in the sense that they are demanding that they be proactive. So when the budget is passed, for instance, they're asking them to post that in the notice boards. So you will go to some councils in the country right now, you will find that there is that information on notice boards. This is the amount of money that has been approved. This is so much going to what activity and so forth. And this is good because now it helps citizens to hold officials to account at the end of that financial year. They can clearly say, you said this money would go to the bridge and there's no bridge at the moment. So they'll seek answers. So that is good. However, I must say that we're still a long way in terms of sensitizing the masses to fully understand how to use the law and use it as a fundamental right to actually enjoy these other rights. Because it's only when you have enough information that you're able to enjoy the other rights, the health, education, and so forth. So I think we still need to do a lot more in terms of sensitization. This is not just a government role. It also lays on us as civil society and other interested stakeholders. I think the other gaps that have already been mentioned, but I think one critical issue that I also need to point out here is the fact that, the government has given us this law, but it seems like they are using another way to also tighten up the boats using the financial means. So is the Malawi Human Rights financially equipped right now to carry out, for instance, things that I'm talking about now? In that, they have a very small budget for them to run those activities. So yes, they will give us this, but at the same time go around, because we are not really on top of our game and not looking at the other ways that the government can tighten up those
hear from your end to say, what is it that Parliament is doing to make sure that we have laws that are in line with the access to information and also freedom of expression? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. I think in the first place, it's important to appreciate that it's actually Parliament that passed this law, the Access to Information Act, and therefore Parliament must be applauded for passing such a progressive law. But it's also important to note that, apart from the function of legislation, Parliament also does a lot of work behind the scenes, mainly through the committees. The oversight function that is now there in the Constitution for Parliament is actually done mainly through the committees. And I'm privileged that chairperson of the Legal Affairs Committee, we do provide oversight over the Malawi Human Rights Commission, which is actually charged with the responsibility of overseeing the implementation of the Access to Information Act. I want also to admit here that the laws we pass are not 100% perfect. Actually, the council here gave us 98% on this law. We really do admit, and so that's why there is room for amendment of the laws. And obviously, so far as Teresa was speaking and as council was speaking, even from the Malawi Human Rights Commission, obviously one would note some glaring gaps that are there in the laws currently when it comes to access to information. And again, the right of freedom of expression. There are gaps that need to be dealt with. And as a parliament that is responsive to what people are saying, obviously we stand ready to make those amendments because as others have already spoken, we are in a democratic Malawi. We adopted a progressive constitution in 1994, and therefore it's important that even other statutes that were there that are archaic, draconian, should actually be amended or repealed. I think I was discussing with Charles of the lunch break that it's important to also highlight that as a nation, we are making progress. Is it last week, the state president, during the Press Freedom Day, did mention that as a president, he's willing actually to have the Protected Names, Emblems, and Flags Act repealed. I mean, I've never heard about that because this is a law that is supposed to protect him, but he's willing to have it repealed. And so that's a progress that we're talking about as a nation. It's important to highlight, the strides that we're making as a nation. Even the issue of having this ATI operationalized now, it's been there, even after it was passed, but it wasn't operationalized. I think that's progress that we're making as a nation. I think before I, yield the floor, I wanted also to highlight, it's very important that as we preach this message or this gospel of access to information and freedom of expression, we should equally emphasize on the need for responsibility of the members of the general public. It's important for the members of the general public to also understand that they have a responsibility to make sure that as they express, as they enjoy their rights, they should not infringe on other people's rights. I think it's an area, council, that we need also to balance up, because there's no such a thing as unlimited freedom or unlimited rights, because even the Constitution itself, in certain circumstances, delimits these rights or various, statutes.
I want you to just highlight the international experience on the access to information and also freedom of expression. As you're doing that, I also want you to touch on the best practices that we can learn as a country. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So I think listening to everybody, there have been reference to some of the international frameworks. I think it was Barrister that mentioned the Declaration of the Principle of Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. Access to information was, modeled after the Pan-African model law in that regard. And also, I think in the previous session, it was mentioned that Malawi is significant to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. However, I would prefer to, there were a few issues I picked up during the conversation that I would love to speak to. Firstly, Honorable, you were talking about the issue of responsibility on the part of users, and given the kind of work we do across the continent, I hear that a lot. There is hardly any country that I go to where we have this kind of conversation that people don't talk about, especially people on the side of the government, that you also need to let users know that they have to be responsible. But I also think that there is a misconception in that expectation. There is, before the digital age, I think anything that is subject to abuse can be abused and will be abused. What is important is that what are the frameworks in place to address those kind of issues? And that's why we talk about the laws that we are trying to use to address criminality on cyberspace. What are the provisions in those laws? Are they draconian, and are they focused on addressing specific issues, or they are just vague, like many people have highlighted today? So, and when you talk about digital responsibility, it's not just about the people, it's about everybody. For example, digital responsibility on behalf, for citizens is, number one, you have to fact check information that you receive and share online. So it's not just for you to see any information and start sharing. That is digital responsibility on the part of citizens. Another way you can look at digital responsibility on the part of citizens is when you are online, don't bully other users, because where your right stops is where the right of another person begins. So you cannot, for example, women face a lot of online, bullying. A woman is expressing herself, then because it's a woman, a man is shouting her down. You understand? There are also sometimes coordinated attacks, etc. So that is on behalf on the side of the citizen. Now, on the side of the government, what does digital responsibility mean? Because most time when this conversation happens, responsibility often is sent as a message on citizens to self-censor themselves. And that is totally against the concept of digital rights. What we don't even want to see is self-censorship. Yeah, there should be fact-checking. There should be respect for other users, but not self-censorship, right? So what is the expectation, for example, for government? In terms of digital responsibility, one of the responsibility for government is also to ensure that there are rights, laws in place, policies that guides, how we use and, exist in the digital space. For example, there was the last session, there was a point that came up around government surveillance. And in his response, the DG for MACRA was saying that there is nothing like surveillance. We cannot deceive ourselves. It is not possible to do law enforcement in 2022 without surveillance. So the conversation we should be having is that surveillance should not be mass. What we should discourage is mass surveillance. What we should discourage is illegitimate surveillance. For example, law enforcement will need certain technology to be able to carry out their responsibility in this age. There are some crimes that you cannot investigate without relying on some form of technology. But the questions that we need to answer and the kind of responsibility that government need to exhibit is by ensuring that they put the right regulatory frameworks around surveillance. Now, that's where we are missing the point. Instead of saying, oh, we are not surveilling, there can't be surveillance, we should be saying that how do we ensure that we protect the right to privacy, even as we rely on technology to fight crime and criminality. So when you're talking about responsibility or digital responsibility on the side of government, government has to perform its own responsibility in terms of ensuring that there are regulatory framework around the use of technology in fighting crime and solving some of the challenges that we are faced with in the digital age. Another thing that I think is part of the responsibility of government is also the issue of transparency. It's also one of the key issues. And thank God we are talking about access to information. One of the problems we have in Africa, especially, but not just Africa, if not for the Snowden revelation, we wouldn't know that the US government was doing all the surveillance that it was doing. So I wasn't surprised when the DG was saying there was no surveillance. The US said there was no surveillance until there was Snowden revelation. But we don't have to get to that point. What we need to do is to be transparent. Because every reasonable person knows that government needs to rely on certain form of technology to effectively perform law enforcement responsibility in this age. And I'm going to give you an example of what happened in Nigeria. At a point, there was a lot of kidnapping that was going on in Nigeria, and government had to rely on surveillance technology to monitor the kidnappers. Because what usually happens is that the kidnappers, mostly they kidnap expatriates. When they kidnap expatriates, then they put a call through maybe to the company. So maybe the expatriates work for Shell, for example. Then they call Shell and say, bring $5 million before we can release this guy to you. Now, so government invested in a lot of surveillance capacity and technology to be able to track those kind of calls so that you know where the calls is coming from, and then you are able to arrest the criminal. But then what happened is that same technology, government started to use it to monitor their political opponents. Who are they talking to? How are they strategizing? Now, that gives you a picture of what happens when government has surveillance capacity. It's just like you have a knife in your kitchen. You can use it to prepare your food. It can also be used to kill. It can also be used to attack. So the question that we need to address, therefore, is that while we are trying to address the challenge of the digital age, how do we ensure that we create safeguards around all of these? And that's kind of openness that we need to exhibit. Denial doesn't help us. We need to be open about those conversations, and we can also have a multi-stakeholder approach to how we're addressing that problem. And I also believe that the legislator have a responsibility in that regard to continue to come up with legislations, and also for the regulator to come up with regulations that address many of these issues. But if we are not open to those conversations, we will not be addressing them, and we just be going in a cycle, accusing ourselves. Civil society will accuse government will fire back, and all of that. So to move forward, we should work together and try to create framework around those kind of system. So finally, talking about digital responsibility, I also just want to say that apart from the legislator, there is also a need for the private sector to also be digitally responsible. How can the private sector be digitally responsible? You are collecting a lot of data. You have to use those data responsibly. If you collect data to provide service, for example, it doesn't give you the right to use the same data and sell it to another provider, because I don't have a contract with that provider. You are the one I've given that data to. So from the private sector perspective, that is how they can, exhibit what I call digital responsibility. So in summary, what I've basically said is that when we talk about digital responsibility, it is not just people focused. It is government focused. It is private sector focused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boy. This time around, I would want to give a chance to the audience. If you have any comments or questions directed to any of the panelists, please proceed. Because of time, let's be precise.
Mine is a question on accessibility of the digital platforms, especially to the community of persons with disabilities. In specific, those having visual impairment and partial visual impairment. Is there anything which has been planned or guidelines to make the inclusivity really inclusive? Because I can see since morning, I've been hearing inclusive people in the community, people somewhere there in the village, but the element of inclusivity which focuses on persons with disabilities, it's lacking there. So I wanted to understand, are there guidelines that are going to make the digital platform inclusive? Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ivy Chawia, National Planning Commission. I just have to top up from what my friend there said on digitalization in terms of access to information. I just want to understand, especially from what the human rights official said, access to information. You talked of maybe moving from one office to the other to access information. For example, in Lilongwe, you said you shouldn't travel to data, shouldn't travel to Planta, but maybe within Lilongwe. But despite maybe traveling within a short distance, to what extent maybe are we trying to make the important information accessible online, especially the public offices? Because when we look at most of the public offices, the key information that we need to access online is not there. Even the services charters are not there. So, is it the Human Rights Commission? Is it the Ministry of Information? Who is supposed to enforce that? And to what extent maybe the ITI has provided for organizations or public institutions to make important information accessible to the public? Thank you so much.
Is there any hand?
Thank you very much. One of the gaps or problems that we've noticed in terms of enforcement of ATI compliance is the limitation in terms of enforcement powers that Malawi Human Rights Commission has. So for example, at the moment, Malawi Human Rights would be able to provide external review and make recommendations, but they cannot fine, they cannot provide any consequences to duty bearers, which is a huge problem, because we've seen with most of the public institutions that face consequences when they have erred in some way, including issues of law. And this can be a really huge problem, especially with limitations to access to information. And also that said, we know that Malawi Human Rights Commission is based here in Lilongwe, and we are looking at how do you enforce access to information at the rural community, somebody that is in Nkatabe or in Sanje that has a problem, but Malawi Human Rights Commission does not have district offices in such institutions. If you attach a cost to it, people will just give up before they even think of reaching to Malawi Human Rights for external review. So that's another problematic information. The last one is issues around information officers. The information officers that are being appointed at the moment are people that are already holding positions. And one of the problems that we've come across with information officers we've worked with is this position is a burden to us because we already have overwhelming work, and this adds to the work that we're already doing. Why can't we create another position which is specifically looking at making sure that information is available that includes data management across, which is a current problem, and all that, which is a problem. So those are some of the things that probably you could help in terms of addressing, but also some of the things we can be looking forward in terms of addressing as we look at legislation reforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. I think many of the questions are directed to Malawi Human Rights Commission. And before you start addressing the questions, I think you have also a minute to say your last words, and then the mic will pass through. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So maybe just to wrap it up, I would say that the access to information law is now operational. Although the oversight mandate is to the Commission, I believe the responsibility to ensure that this law is fully operational is to all of us. On our part, we will continue to engage government, parliament, as well as other relevant stakeholders to make sure that we get to the situation that we all want. In other words, it's about issues of networking, collaboration, and so on and so forth. Questions about the accessibility of digital platforms, especially for people with disabilities. I think, let me take note of this. It's one of the things that we need to work on. I think that even when we are coming up with guidelines as well as procedures for accessing to information, we took note of the fact that we need to make information available even to people with disabilities. So that is available. However, I still believe that there is more that we can do. In other words, when people will be making requests for information, there is provision both in the law as well as the regulations that they can ask in different formats. So that would even include information being provided in Braille and so on and so forth. So it's something that as a commission, we have already taken note of, and we believe in the long term, it will be worked out. How to make information available in terms of digitization. Actually, Regulation 7 requires that all information must be digitized. So one of the strategies of actually ensuring that information is available to a wide section of people is to make sure that that information is digitized. And the expectation is that once information has been digitized, then you can put it online through websites or other platforms. In fact, the existence of functional and regularly updated websites is an obligation that every information holder has. So even as we monitor compliance as a Human Rights Commission, we are also checking who has websites that are functional, regularly updated, and accessible to as many people as possible. This is also one area that requires investment, because some of the institutions we have visited so far indicate that they don't have active websites that are also updated regularly. And the guidelines actually have a checklist of primary information that must be there. So as you are asking to say, there are some institutions maybe with the information online, but what one is looking for is not there. It is up to us as a commission actually to even check and find out whether the content is making sense. The enforcement powers of the Human Rights Commission, I think I can also take note of that. Just to highlight the fact that there are 3 stages of enforcement there. So for instance, if one has not received information, they can appeal internally within that institution. After they have not succeeded, that's when they can actually come to the commission. And if the commission again has not satisfied the expectations of the person, then the person can go to court. But you are also looking at whether the Human Rights Commission can actually fine and penalize an institution for breach of the Access to Information Act. I think so far we don't have that mandate, and we're not very much surprised because the Constitution, I think, is it under section 129, if not 130, also indicate that the Commission shall not be given legislative or judicial mandate. So to some extent, we don't have the powers to fine someone, but the fines can always be done if that matter goes to court. So the opportunity is not completely lost. You have also mentioned the fact that maybe we are not available throughout the districts, but we believe that the available structures, be it the local government councils and other structures, should be able to work hand in hand with us, and everyone should be assisted. So what we are also focusing on ourselves is to empower local structures so that things don't have to wait to reach us here in Lilongwe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your last words, Mr. Dimba.
Thank you very much. I think by way of closing remarks from me, I would say that right of freedom of expression or access to information is non-negotiable under the laws and the Constitution, and therefore the statutes that are kind of draconian, that are archaic, are not in tandem with the constitutional provisions of freedom of expression and access to information, I think should be repealed or amended. And I'm glad that even as I mentioned earlier on, that His Excellency the President talked about the same the other day when we were celebrating the Press Freedom Day. But it's also important to the members of the public to be aware that all rights have limitations. And therefore, as I said earlier on, self-censorship and the sense of responsibility need to be considered as the people enjoy their rights, so that they should also respect the rights of other people and that they are not in conflict with the law. Lastly, I think it's important that we should celebrate the small gains that as a country have made. We're talking of the operationalization of the access to information, but even the willingness by government, even as expressed at the highest level of the presidency, that there is need for the repealing of some of the archaic laws, like the protected emblems, names, and flags. Otherwise, I thank you so much, moderator. Thank you.
Over to you, Council.
Thank you so much. I think my last words will be that the responsibility to amend, to challenge some of these laws, I think starts with all of us. If we keep on talking about it and advocating for the change, we will soon or later get there. As long as we take that responsibility, we should never push that responsibility to anyone else. And also, another very important point is that most of the rights that we have, the freedom to express oneself and to access information, they act as a very basic foundation to most of the freedoms that we have. So we can't have, for example, a free and fair election if people cannot freely express themselves. We can't have, a good subsidy program, whatever it is. We don't know what's happening there. We can't have. So most of the rights, these two rights, they act as a very basic foundation, and we should safeguard them, and we should safeguard them very jealously. And my last appeal will therefore be also to the politicians to respect, I think, the Constitution, and as much as they can avoid surveillance, avoid arresting people using draconian laws. Thank you.
Ms. Ndanga.
Thank you so much. I think appeal back to what Council said earlier on the moratorium, was advocating for the signing of the Table Mountain with several of the past presidents. And we did remind the current one that if indeed they're committed to ensure that the draconian laws are not used or the archaic laws are not being used, those especially that are in conflict with the rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution of Malawi, then he should sign the moratorium, rather the Table Mountain, because then it ensures that no one else acts outside what has been signed. We did see that Honorable Chimwendo, when he was Home Affairs Minister, he did make a comment, a public comment, that this administration, the policy of this administration is to ensure that laws that are in conflict with freedoms or human rights will not be used. Yeah, that was a minister saying that. And at that particular time, we indeed saw that the police withdrew a warrant of arrest, which was on the head of then this political activist. I'm forgetting his name now. Yes, Bon Galindo. Yes, they withdrew that warrant. But now what is happening? The minister is out of that office, and we have seen another arrest happening, almost on the same charges. So I think we really need the president to sign the Table Mountain and make a public commitment. Secondly, I just want to reiterate what my colleagues have already said earlier on. We as human rights activists, we as civil society, we are not backing the people that insult others. What we are saying, it's not necessary to put handcuffs on someone that seems to have offended another person. The offended person can seek the legal route in terms of the civil route, rather than handcuffing someone, jailing someone because of this. So we are not really saying it's right, but let's follow the civil route other than the other one. Otherwise, just a quick one to Dennis's comment on information officers complaining that they have a lot of work. Guys, it will be very expensive if this government will begin to recruit new information officers. We would rather use the people that are there. So let's be a little more patriotic and work for our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. On the last question that you've just addressed, I think I wanted to give the chance to Mr. Chisi also to respond to that. And thank you so much for badly tackling it. But Mr. Chisi, in a second, can you also respond to that?
No, I think just to agree with the position taken in terms of the approach. Section 20 of the Constitution talks about non-discrimination. I think whatever we do in terms of actions, we must apply equally. Why should person A be inserted and you don't take action? Person B is being inserted and you take action. So I think as a country, we must actually apply human rights to everybody. That is what I can say to that. But I think there was a question that I forgot to respond to earlier on about the issue of information officers. And the question was, some information officers have been designated, but they have other responsibilities. The simple response to that is that in the law and the regulations actually allow that institutions can employ full-time information officers. It's just that in our public service, maybe the procedure for establishing permanent positions is a bit slow. So the issue of designating was taken as a shortcut, but it is very much acceptable and recommended that institutions must have permanent information officers. So that is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Boy, concluding remarks.
Okay, so for me, I would love to first say, I think it's important for us to be open-minded. We cannot take this conversation forward if we are not open-minded, and being open-minded means that we must be willing to challenge even our strongly held beliefs. That said, I also want to quickly, mention, I see that even from the previous session and this session, the issue of insults kept coming up. But I honestly believe that as Africans in 2022, we should not be discussing criminalization of insults. It shows how backward we are if we think it is okay to criminalize insults, because there is no world in which, for example, a government official will be criminalized for insulting an ordinary citizen. The only people who get jailed for insulting anyone are ordinary citizens. So it is a draconian provision in any law where it is found. It is one of the laws that is used to suppress the weakest in society, because no big person will ever, be arrested for insulting a lesser person. That said, it is important to separate something like insult from things like false information or defamatory comments. Yeah, we understand that there can be liability for comments that are defamatory, etc. That is totally understandable. But I align with the submission made by my colleague from MISA that it's important that even that should be prosecuted as a civil case, not as a criminal case. Finally, we highlighted in the morning that currently, in terms of access to the internet in Malawi, we have about 14 to 15%. And if at 14 to 15%, we are so worried about things like insult, what happens when we get to 80%? So we really need to mature this conversation and look at a bigger picture of how do we manage the digital ecosystem when we have more people on the internet. We cannot be pursuing things like insults when there are bigger issues to deal with. I mean, we are so backward. That is actually the real conversation. How do we catch up with the rest of the world? And when we get to that point, how are we able to provide a regulatory system that address the top challenges that you have? Because at the end of the day, the most significant challenges we have are not things like insult. We only think that they are a problem now because we are still stuck in the past. By the time you have more people on the internet, you realize that there is a lot of issues that has to be dealt with in the way people use the internet. And like I said earlier, things like fact checking, we need to invest a lot of energy into it, because a lot of people share false information innocently, because people believe that anything they see online is true. So they are happy to start sharing it. So there is a lot of effort that needs to be invested into things like fact checking, things like digital security, and digital security for everybody, not just for the people, for government officials. How does government officials protect themselves from possible hacking of their devices? How do people protect themselves from possible hacking of their devices, etc.? I believe that the conversation cannot end in a sitting. So it's a conversation we have to keep, continue to have. And I hope that we, create an environment that allows for such conversation.
Thank you
Honorable
so much.
wants to respond to me again.
Not really. I know time is gone, but I wish we had more time so he could tell us how the situation is back in Nigeria, whether the use of hate speech is not an offense at all. I wish we learned more from what's happening in Nigeria as a way by benchmarking.
Yeah, I know, but because of time, I would give you space to talk. But I would like to thank you, the panelists, for reserving your time, and also for the fruitful discussions, and also the audience. At this point in time, I would like to relieve you from this, and also call upon Charles to continue with the program. Thank you.
Oh yeah. I'm being reminded solely of our distinguished panelists. Please, just a minute for a photo here. I'm being requested if you could just do a quick photo here, just for a minute, if you don't mind. Right. Thank you so much. Of course, it was by demand by Boy. Thank you. Manila, who's taking the photo? Right. Right. Thank you. Marriage is not criminalized. Not at all. Thank you so much. I know we're running really late in terms of our program. Looking at the time that we have, we're supposed to end this program at 4, but we started late. But we still have one very short session, and I really want to appeal to your patience and resilience that we are almost done. We're almost there. These sessions are going to be very, very brief, less than 30 minutes. And it is on a very crucial subject matter. And if we really believe in the values of inclusion, this is a very, very important. So we have a very brief session on women and the disability rights in the digital age that Tobekile is going to quickly facilitate. And let me at this point in time, I invite Beatrice Mateo from SEWAG to join us in front. And that also that should be followed by, we have a representation from the UN Women, in case there's a representation from UN Women in this room. But if you don't have, that's fine. Then we're supposed to have Mr. Simon Munde from FEDOMA. Right, so there's a hand there, there's a representation. Please join us in front for this short session. And let me also invite Ms. Immaculate Maluza, the president of the Women Lawyers Association, or the representative. Do we have representation from the Women Lawyers Association? No, fine. So, as I did indicate, this is going to be a very short session. Thank you so much, Tobikere, for really accepting to facilitate this session, and please, over to you. I don't know the name yet, but we can just take the name from her. Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you so much. This is a very interesting closing panel because it's the last one, and I see everyone in that space where they now want to leave. But I think this is a very critical panel, and it's important that we kind of jump into it and are able to interrogate issues of inclusion, issues of how we can respect women's rights in the digital age, and how we can also respect the rights of persons with disabilities in the digital age. So I'm happy to introduce to you two wonderful panelists who have been willing to join us as we interrogate how we can advance women's rights and persons with disabilities, their rights in the digital age. So I will allow, because it's a pretty fast panel, I'll allow you, to just introduce yourself, introduce your organization so that you do justice to the work that you're doing, and so that colleagues here who are not familiar with your work are as well able to better appreciate what you're doing in this space. So I will start right here on my immediate left. Welcome, please feel free to introduce yourself and your organization.
Is this afternoon, everyone? As you've heard, my name is Beatrice Mateo. I am co-founder and executive director of Coalition for the Empowerment of Women and Girls. I'm also a member of the Women Human Rights Defenders Coalition. I'm also a feminist. We obviously, as the name suggests, we work with women and girls to ensure that they live in a world free of gender-based violence. We work through capacity building on their rights, community sensitization, trainings. We also work with men and boys as agents of change to ensure they are at the forefront of ending GBV. And we also do advocacy in conjunction with other like-minded organizations. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you so much. A lot of great work happening there. And I would love also for us to then at some point interrogate GBV online when we're looking at online gender-based violence and to what extent I think that is, before you jump right in, I'll also allow the next panelist to also introduce herself and the great work that you're doing in your space.
Thank you. The director. I'm Ethel Kachala Chibwana from FEDOMA, in short, in full Federation of Disability Organizations in Malawi. I work as a manager, and I also coordinated on gender-based violence, especially on women and girls with disabilities. So basically, that's my work, and I also work with other disability rights issues. FEDOMA, actually, it focuses on advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities, and there are 12 affiliates that make FEDOMA, and amongst those 12 affiliates, we have Association of Persons with Albinism, Association of Persons with Physical Disability. We have Association of Persons with Malawi Association of the Deaf. We have NEA, National Epilepsy Association of Malawi. And we also have disability rights organization. We have disabled women in development. We also have disabled widows and the orphans in Malawi, just to mention a few, because the time is not on our side.
Thank you so much. And I think that is, great work that's happening with a number of organizations as well, advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. So before I circle back to you, I'll ask Beatrice to just take us through what are the issues, what are the challenges in Malawi when we're looking at women's rights in the digital age? Because we do appreciate that we have the Maputo Protocol, which outlines the rights of women and how women's rights must be advanced. And I think it is necessary at this point that we begin to interrogate those challenges that women are facing, particularly in the digital age, because I think from the onset during this conversation from the morning, we discussed a lot about some of the challenges. So I would like to hear from you, as someone who's in the space advancing women's rights. What are the issues, the gaps, and possibly the barriers that you can highlight?
I think generally, when you look at exposure of women compared to men in our society, women are less exposed and are less likely to use things like smartphone, for example, to access information. Those things are mainly owned by the men. Largely, it has to do with, access to money, access to funds to be able to purchase those things. And we know they can be costly in our communities. So that also affects in terms of access to information for them. So when you look at the time of COVID, we mainly relied on use of online platforms, for example, to conduct meetings, to disseminate information. It was very difficult for even us as a women's movement to connect with people in the rural communities, because then they could not be able to access those platforms, thereby then they are limited in terms of the information that they can get. Also, I wanted to look at the National Plan of Action for ending GBV. Of course, it expired. They are in the process of developing another one. But when you look at it, it doesn't address issues, emerging issues, such as these online forms of harassment. So talk of cyberbullying, online harassment, and so on and so forth. So I think it would also be important moving forward if we had those things critically highlighted in such critical documents, because then it ensures that it is effectively, addressed in the implementation of programs. I think let me stop there for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting those gaps, policy gaps with regards to addressing online gender-based violence. You find that as well in other countries in Africa as well. I'll speak to Zimbabwe. You find that we have a Domestic Violence Act, but within that act itself, it does not stipulate what online gender-based violence is. And so you find that that's why sometimes women face challenges as well when they go to the police to kind of report online gender-based violence. The police don't seem to understand it, because for them in the law book, it talks about online gender-based violence as something that to them is seemingly only for the offline space. But I think there's room for policy indeed to develop in such a way that it also addresses gender-based violence online. And also, you also mentioned something to do with access to digital technologies for women being a gap as well. And I think that's something that we need to continue to engage on, I think, with the relevant duty bearers. Okay, let's talk about persons with disabilities. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got the Africa Disability Protocol, and to my understanding, Malawi is not a state party to that important protocol. But apart from it signifying how, if the government, for instance, of Malawi ratifies that, it signifies a commitment towards advancing the rights of persons with disabilities in Malawi. What are your concerns as FIDEMA with regards to the gaps, the challenges with regards to the digital age?
Actually, Malawi ratified the UNCRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability in 2007, and 2008, it started the implementation. But however, there's this framework. Women with disabilities still experience challenges because of the attitudes outside there, because of the society's exclusion. I can just read something. In most situations in Malawi, regard persons with disabilities, most situations regarding persons with disabilities show a high level of discrimination. We focus on the discrimination because it is worse among women and girls with disabilities because they face multiple discrimination. They face discrimination as a woman. At the same time, they face discrimination as a woman with disability. So in this case, most women with disability, they are there in the village. They have no information on their rights. They have no information on the gender-based violence issues. So due to that, their cases go unreported. And even when they are reported, people don't pay attention. They say, this is normal. Persons with disabilities, because they are taken as not human beings. And we have these issues whereby they say persons with disability, especially women, they can be used for rituals. Like when you sleep with them, you have HIV and the virus will go. Such type of beliefs also violates the rights of persons with disabilities. I just wanted to give an example of myself and somebody who doesn't have a disability. We are walking along the road and something, so somebody, maybe somebody, a gangster wants to rape. Who will be easier raped? It's me, because I will not be able to run. But my colleague, by the time I realized that I had a friend, she's somewhere else. So those are the issues. And we also have these colleagues of ours with mental disabilities. Most men take advantage of those persons because, they can be deceived with 50 kwacha. They can be deceived even with a sweat and go and do anything with them. So such type of violation of women with disability, they are so rampant in the community. I want to give you an example. There's a certain lady in Doha, which is the southern part. She has 6 babies of she doesn't know the father. The lady is visually impaired. So such type of things are happening there to women and girls with disabilities. Their rights are, violated almost every day, but their cases are reported. Even if when they are reported, they are just kept there. And even some of the chiefs, they say, you are so difficult. Why are you just coming to us? And that's what they tell us there in the society. So yeah, basically, let me stop there. Thank you.
Just to pick your mind further on this, maybe before you pass on the mic, you've kind of highlighted, the problems that we face, that persons with disabilities rather face within society, things to do with discrimination, like double discrimination, even when we're looking at women who are women and also women with disabilities. So that is something that definitely needs to be addressed, and I'm sure that within the frameworks of the Constitution of Malawi, equality is provided for, non-discrimination equally provided for. But let's also interrogate the aspect of digital inclusion and how you think it would assist persons with disabilities in Malawi. Do persons with disabilities have access to digital technologies? Do they have meaningful access to assistive devices, for instance, when we're talking about their rights in the digital age?
Yeah, that's another challenge. The time I was passing there with the minister going around, I was keenly observing to find out, is there any brochure here which is in accessible format? I'm sorry, accessible format. Is there a braille or at least one? There wasn't any there. So about the digital platform, would like to explore, I mean, like to lobby the stakeholders of this platform to say that they should explore ways and means that can persons with a disability have an opportunity to use the platform. For example, they can also think of having software speeches. They can also think of, like some elements that can tell a visual impaired person that this, when you click here, it will show you this. So that's what we would wish to see on the digital platform. It has to be accessible and fully accessible to persons of diverse disabilities, even those women that have problems with the mental disability. They should also have an opportunity to access to those. However, we still have challenges that most women, they don't know how to use. So an awareness has also to be created to most women in the rural area. Thank you.
Thank you so much for couching that in a very clear and specific way, that we need platforms that are accessible to persons with disabilities, but not just persons with disabilities, but persons of diverse disabilities. That is very critical. Thank you so much for highlighting that. So I think we're going to say our last remarks, and I think you've just touched on the surface, and you've left, I think, everybody here with something to ponder about, to think about, even as we continue to engage in these conversations in upcoming sessions. I will ask you to say what your final words are in terms of the recommendations, or what an ideal situation would be like when we're looking at digital platforms for persons with disabilities. I'll start with you and then wrap up with Beatrice.
All right, thank you so much. My last remarks would say would be parents should send their children to school so that they should be able to take part in the in the society, in terms of chatting with their friends, at the same time having education that will make themselves in the future to advocate for themselves and to fight for their rights in the future. Because I can give my example. If my parents did give me an opportunity to go to school, I wasn't be here. It couldn't be possible for me to be here. But I would request parents to send their children to school. Now, the other thing is, I wanted to say that issues of human rights, they are for all. They are not for a certain group of people, but for every person has a right. We are no longer in the traditional model. We are no longer in the charity model. We are no longer in the medical model. These days, this era is an era of human rights approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those great insights with us, and also that good recommendation. Even when considering the African Children's Charter, it does place as well responsibilities on parents. So that is a very critical aspect. So most appreciated. And Beatrice, what are your final words?
I think I'll pick up on where she left off, that, this is an era of human rights. And there's a buzzword that's going around, social inclusion. And I think we cannot be talking about Agenda 2063 or the Sustainable Development Goals if other groups of people are left behind. So we need to make sure that there's inclusion of all groups, whether people living with disabilities or women living with disabilities, they're included. And that also includes the digital world. And I think mostly the intersectionality of the challenges that women living with disabilities face is usually not recognized. So we need to be moving towards recognizing those issues so that then they can be addressed. There are also other groups of women that are seen to be different and are also left out. So we talk about the sex workers, we talk about lesbian women, and or along that continuum, they also need to be recognized so that when we are doing empowerment in the digital platforms, they are also part of that. And I also wanted to talk about our laws. Not many of us, including even the so-called educated people, we don't have access to the laws and we don't know the laws. So I think if there could be a move of making them simpler, simplifying them for the basic understanding of us, the lay people. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the intersectionalities of things, even when we're looking at also the gendered nature of some of the challenges that we've been discussing here. It's really when you're looking at cyberbullying, you find that, or online gender-based violence, you find that it's more of a gendered conversation, which tends on women, bearing the brunt the most. And when we're looking at as well the intersectionalities that as well women with disabilities face, so it's definitely a conversation that we want to have. And the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum today has been interrogating how we can move towards a digitally inclusive and rights respecting Africa. So it was critical for us to ensure that we have this conversation on how marginalized groups for so many years can also have a stake in the digital age. So thank you so much. I think it's been a brief but very interesting conversation. And I don't know if there are any two questions, just two questions, please, for our panelists, if any. Maybe there's somebody with a burning question, and I do not want to take away the opportunity. It seems everyone understands, everyone is happy, and I trust that you continue to champion the rights of persons with disabilities as well as women's rights as we go forward. So thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for this wonderful panel. I think I will hand over. I'm not so sure. Is it to you, Charles? Yes, please. Please, can you take a good picture of us? Beatrice, thank you so much for calling for that one. Definitely, we need to get one.
Thank you so much, Tobikile, and our two distinguished panelists, and also thank you so much our distinguished audience for being resilient and patient enough indeed to run this far. It has been a long day, quite heavy, and we really appreciate your time. At this point, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we really want to come to the very close of our 9th edition of Digital Rights Forum in Malawi. As I did indicate, this is happening in 17 countries. All right. It's happening in 17 countries, and one of them being Malawi. We are really excited to have hosted this, and this really has been courtesy of your participation. At this point, as one way of also getting feedback on how we can even do better next time, we are sharing a link with you via email, and is it via email, right? Yes, so via email. It will only take you 3 minutes to fill that evaluation form. It's important that we get your feedback about this session and how we can do even better next time. So please feel free to fill that form. Just check your email inboxes. I guess all of us will have received that that link maybe in the next minute or so, if you have not already received that one. We were supposed to have a very last session there on the pin tools. I know Boy has already forgiven me and the organizers that we will not have that session because of time. We just wanted to introduce the tools that PIN is using, including the data, the Londa, among other platforms that that PIN is using. But the easiest way is to go on the Paradigm Initiative website. You see several tools that you can access there. One tool that you easily access if you are under distress or under attack online, you will find the tool there. You can report, those violations, and there is also a rapid response to the violations suffered by journalists, human rights defenders. Those are some of the tools for protection that you will find there. So please find time to go on those platforms and see how you can access them and use them in your digital rights work. Let me also mention that Paradigm Initiative convenes a number of networks or coordinates a number of networks. And some of you might be interested to join some of these digital rights coalitions or networks as individuals as well as organizations, so that we are part and parcel of the movement. Malawi must become part and parcel of the regional, and international digital rights movement, because indeed, they say together we bargain and divided we beg. So we reject begging, but bargaining together, and those numbers really matter a lot. So there is the Net Rights Coalition, and again, they're also trying to look at how do we even coordinate that at country level, and at some point later this year, we'll be looking at how do we even strengthen the national coalitions or network around digital rights in this country. So let me encourage you to also visit the Paradigm Initiative network, and you see these collaboration or partnership opportunities that are there, so that we also become part and parcel of the regional and international digital rights movement. This far, let me also once again thank PIN and thank all of you for attending this session. And as a way of concluding, let me invite PIN to give us a closing remark, and then we close this meeting. As we do so, in terms of logistics, as communicated to you through invitations, Mwandida is around, is at that far end. Please see her as you leave this room. Over to you, PIN.
All right, thanks very much. On behalf of the Executive Director as Paradigm Initiative, Benga Asheson, the leadership team at Paradigm Initiative, I want to express our profound gratitude to all of you for coming out to be part of this conversation, and especially to thank our friends, colleague and partner, Youth and Society, its Executive Director, Charles, who is also a brother and a friend, for putting together a very decent event. I think they deserve a round of applause. Can you please put your hands together for Charles and the team? Also to thank the MACRA, And of course, to thank, he's not here anyway, but just to recognize and again appreciate the Honorable Minister who was here earlier in the morning and for spending time with us, the Director General at MACRA, the Honorable Member of the Parliament who was here earlier, also the Director from the Human Rights Commission, and other panelists and everybody who has contributed to this event one way or the other, the great guys on the media team, the sound engineer, everybody who has played one role or the other, the guys coordinating, the logistics, no matter what you have contributed to make sure that this event is a success, to say that we see all the efforts and we appreciate all the contributions. Again, if you have any question to ask regarding any work that Paradigm Initiative is doing, or if you're interested in some of the things we have spoken to, myself and my colleague will still be around for a few minutes after the event, just we can still interact with you and probably share one or two information with you. So thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to do this, and we look forward to next time. We don't know exactly when next time will be, whether it is going to be next month or next year, but I'm sure that we will see again very soon. Thank you and God bless you.
Yeah, so that marks the end of our program. Thank you so much. If you want to get a good picture of yourself using this frame and tweet and Facebook, this is the time. So nice and beautiful pictures here. Take your time, use your phone. If you want us to give you a good camera, we're going to give you a good camera and send a picture to you. Please, you are welcome. Thank you.